Okay, so this is going to be our Pong practice round. Essentially what I'm looking for here is that we make use of variables, that we make use of the if statements to get the program running. We're not making a playable game necessarily or a good game to play, so I don't want you to spend a lot of time on backgrounds and things like that. Doesn't mean you can't put them in, but remember the purpose of this will be to get the programming done. You can look at the rubric and see sort of specifically what I'll be looking for, and anything you do above and beyond won't be evaluated as part of this. The purpose of this is not to get a fun Pong game to play. It's to go through to use the Pong game to learn how to write if statements better and to manipulate variables more specifically. So here I have the very basic game. This is what I'll kind of be giving you as a starting point. You can look at the screen and sort of follow along. The big thing to recognize here is in the normal point in direction, so the direction movements we've done on the first little practice problem, the main directions were north, south, east, and west, sort of up, down, left, right. For Pong, of course, that's not what we want. We want the ball traveling on some sort of an angle. Now, initially, the best way to go about this is probably to start with 45 degrees here. If we think about the fact that it's 0 degrees straight up and down, 90 degrees to the right, 180 down, and negative 90 here, we can do a little bit of math to figure out what the various halfway points are, the diagonals in between. So I've given you the first one is 45. That's the easy one. Sorry, I gave you the easy one. And if we sort of look at what it says, start the ball off in point 0, 0, point in the direction 45 degrees. You can use the regular point in direction and just type over a number. By default, it gives you those four. But in this case, I want the other one. Now, what I've done is created a variable called dir. dir will allow me to change my directions, sort of manipulate my directions algebraically. So I'm setting my direction to 45 so that it matches the direction that the ball is traveling. And every time the ball changes automatically, we'll be setting the direction to be the same as, setting dir to be the same as the direction that the computer is maintaining for us. Move 5 steps, of course, is pretty easy. If we're touching the paddle, right now it says go to 0, 0. So essentially the way this is set up is if I hit the paddle, then I kind of almost lose. The ball goes back to the middle and it resets. And then if on edge bounce. So if you just kind of look at it, it's pretty straightforward. Ball bounces off the edge, bounces off the edge. Of course, you recognize we don't want it bouncing off the back edge eventually. And then basically when I hit the ball, it goes back to the middle and continues on. Okay, so as long as I'm hitting it, it goes back to the 0 spot and moves on. Now, what this will allow me to do, or sort of what direction specifically will allow me to do, is recognize a little bit better when things, or when the ball is going one direction or another. And so we know we don't want the same thing to happen every time we touch the paddle, regardless of the direction the ball is traveling. Eventually what I want is if the ball is traveling up this way, so if it's traveling up at a 45, then it'll bounce back at whatever that angle is. If it's coming down at this angle, then it'll bounce back at whatever that angle is. And so using kind of a combination of a few different pieces here, I can have my program say if I'm touching the paddle and the direction that I'm traveling is the 45, so and I'm going up in this direction, in that case do something specific. Obviously I could have another if statement or an else if sort of option here saying if I'm touching the paddle and the direction I'm moving is the other direction, because I do want the two things to react differently. Right now basically you'll see the ball goes right through the paddle and continues on as long as it's moving this direction. Again, ignores it, and then this time it should be coming back up at a 45, and this time it jumps back to the middle. Okay, so again, this is just a way to have our if statement check two different things. Is the direction that I'm moving the one I want, and am I also touching the paddle? If so, react a certain way. Now again, you know that that's not what you're going to want there. What you're going to want is something to do with direction. So now if I want to change the direction this is going, Point in the direction of 45, of course, we know is this one. We know that negative 90 is basically over there. So something around negative 80 maybe. Seems like a good number. I'm going to let this run. And when it comes close to hitting, we'll see that now as it's coming up to 45, it hits and directs back at this negative 80, whereas if it's coming any other direction, it just goes right through the ball. And the nice thing you'll notice maybe that the bounce itself just works beautifully all along. Whatever the angle is that I'm moving at, the bounce just kind of gives me a true bouncing angle on it. So I don't have to worry about that. But you see now that every one of the times I touch my paddle, the program is ignoring the paddle because we're not moving at a direction of exactly 45. Now, what do we want to do with that to take it further? I have a second version of the program here, and this version of the program, I guess I should show you. So you can see this version is a little bit more complicated. There's a fair bit more here. You can't see it though, unfortunately. Sorry about that. I have variables for lives, score, and speed. Blow this up maybe so we can see it better. And then when we run this one, you can see the pretty typical way of the ball moving fairly nicely along. I do have it a little bit randomized to get a little bit different bounces each time. And you might notice the speed is going up here every time I make contact. My score goes up, the speed goes up, and apparently I'm terrible at this game. And so that's essentially the gameplay there. Lives go down, score goes up, speed is set to 0 at the end here to ensure that the ball doesn't keep moving and allow me to keep playing. I have to start over to actually get it to run again. So I'll shrink that down. I think we have the basic ideas now. Again, what you're looking for, or sort of what you want to recognize, a couple of things. Right now, when the ball goes past me, something specific has to happen. That'll be one of the things, one of these if statements that you can kind of see I have a few of that maybe we didn't have in the original. And scoring and so on, a lot of these things you've done, but the basics will be to have the various variables. The variables, I should have said this at the start, I guess. Variables, in case you haven't quite got it yet, are just storage spaces. They keep track of a value. It doesn't have to be a number necessarily, but usually it will be for our purposes, at least at this point. They keep track of the number of lives, the score, the speed, and so on, and the direction that the ball is traveling at any given time, which allows us to then kind of refer back to it and say things like, if the direction that we're traveling is 45, then we know the ball's moving up and to the right. What's going to happen when I hit the paddle will be a little different than if the ball is traveling down and towards the right. When it hits the paddle, obviously the directions are going to be different after that. So variables are numerical values that vary, that change throughout our program, and that we need to keep track of so that we can actually have our program react differently depending on what's going on in the program.